Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It's Monday, the 22nd of July. In London, I'm Caroline Hepker. Coming up today, President Biden drops out of the presidential race and endorses Vice President Kamala Harris to win the next election. Harris secures the early backing of Democratic heavyweights as others in the party call for an open contest. Plus, investors react. Biden's exit puts the Trump trade in doubt as US election bets get a reset. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. Joe Biden has abandoned his bid for a second term in the White House and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris to take his place as the Democratic nominee. A disastrous debate performance by the 81-year-old against Donald Trump last month crystallized doubts among party leaders, donors and voters. Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, a longtime Biden ally, spoke to the president after the announcement. Here's some of what he told ABC.
The president and I spoke, and I am so grateful for his decades of leadership for our nation. He did thank me for my loyalty, and I thanked him for his leadership. But at the end of the day, what matters is not that exchange, but that he also said, as he said in his letter to the American people, that he's more optimistic than he's ever been.
Chris Coons there discussing his conversation with the president. The decision kicks off a 3-month sprint to the November election, in which Democrats will face the task of uniting around a new nominee only weeks before their nominating convention. In a statement, Biden praised Harris as an extraordinary partner. Harris accepted the president's backing, saying in a subsequent statement that she intends to earn the party's nomination. Bill and Hillary Clinton and several battleground state lawmakers have thrown their support behind the vice president. Here is Congressman Joaquin Castro of Texas.
The only thing that we can do is make sure that we have the strongest campaign going forward. And I believe that Vice President Harris is the person to lead it.
The endorsement there of Congressman Joaquin Castro. Harris's team is understood to have already begun contacting delegates to shore up support ahead of a virtual roll call for the presidential nomination. That many Democrats now see Harris as their best hope of derailing Trump is a remarkable change. Harris has been criticised as vice president for her role addressing migrant crossings at the US-Mexico border. And speaking to Fox News before Biden's announcement, Donald Trump made his feelings about Harris clear.
She's not a competent person. She shouldn't be president. She's being laughed at all over the world.
But Dan Moraine, author of Kamala's Way, An American Life, a biography, says that she would present a significant challenge to Donald Trump.
I think people who underestimate Kamala Harris end up losing. He would not be the first man to underestimate Kamala Harris. She can be formidable. She can be a very good candidate. You know, I moderated a debate that she had when she ran for Attorney General against a very accomplished prosecutor. By all accounts, he should have won that race. He was a very accomplished, but she bested him in that debate.
Dan Moraine, journalist and biographer. Polling released after Biden's disastrous debate with Donald Trump showed that in a head-to-head, they found Harris trailed Trump by 2 points among registered voters compared to Biden, who trailed Trump by 3 points. And Democrats have seen donations of more than $50 million so far, according to Act Blue, the biggest fundraising day of the 2024 cycle. Harris would also have a unique advantage if she secures the nomination. The vice president would have legal access to most of the money that Biden's political operation has on hand. But Democratic donors, including billionaire Rick Caruso and the former investment professional Trey Beck, are calling for an open contest to determine a new candidate. In terms of the markets, investors have been betting on a second Trump presidency for weeks. Biden's exit may mean a recalibration, putting the so-called Trump trade in doubt. But Kathy Jones, chief fixed income strategist at Charles Schwab, says the impact will only be discernible over the long term.
In the long run, obviously, who's in the White House, what those policies are, and who's in Congress will make an important difference in terms of things like tariffs and trade policy. There are some long-term implications, but I think in the near term, this is not something that's probably easily tradable.
Charles Schwab's Kathy Jones speaking there. Following Biden's announcement, the dollar edged lower in Asia trading today. Treasury yields dipped across the curve, with US equity futures little changed. Those are our top stories. Just lastly, in the sports news, Xander Schauffele has won the oldest golf tournament in the world. The 30-year-old ended on 9 under par in the final round of the British Open. He told Sky Sports News that the walk down the 18th was a joy to behold.
It's an honor. It's a dream come true, and just the standing ovation coming down 18, it's exactly how I've seen it on TV and how I've dreamt of it.
Schauffele's victory means all 4 major golf titles have been won by Americans for the first time since 1982. President Biden's debate performance was only on the 27th of June. But now, 3.5 weeks later, he's dropping out. There really does seem to be no playbook now for the next few weeks in America, because it's the first time since Lyndon B. Johnson, more than half a century ago, that actually an incumbent president has decided not to run for a second term. Vice President Kamala Harris looks like the heir apparent. She's secured major endorsements, and as we mentioned in the top stories, she's managed to raise a lot of money in a matter of just hours. And yet there are still so many questions, and many European leaders also thinking about what this new matchup potentially between Harris and Trump might actually look like. Let's bring in some of our top editors and writers this morning to discuss. Our Europe Executive Editor, Chad Thomas, and our EMEA News Director, Roslyn Matheson, here with me to think through the consequences of this, of course, after we got the news late night yesterday in the UK anyway, that Biden was dropping out. Ros, can I bring you in first, please? With Biden gone, can Harris secure the support that she needs to win the Democratic presidential nomination?
Well, she's moving very swiftly to try and do just that. She announced her intentions very deliberately shortly after Biden made his statement. We know that her people have been hitting the phones. She came up very quickly also with an immediate ad that was running within hours, quite a polished ad attacking Trump. So certainly she's been preparing for this possibility, and she's announced her intentions. A bunch of senior party officials, some of the grandees like the Clintons and others, have quickly endorsed her. Some Democratic lawmakers, including from battleground states in the US, have endorsed her, which is important because they were the ones who were pushing also for Biden to go as the candidate, because they were worried that they might also lose Congress as a result of him running. And so that's also important. We've got some senior donors lining up around that. There are some people who are saying this really should be more of an open contest. So we should have, a convention where you have candidates standing and vying for the nomination. But that also means that you're going for another month without the Democratic candidate locked in. And that's getting very, very close to November. And that's less runway for that candidate to really make their mark against Donald Trump. So you can see a real effort to coalesce around her at this point. It's pretty hard to see who else would dislodge her.
Yeah. Harris has had some difficulties as vice president, although I was speaking to a writer who has written the biography of Kamala Harris's life, and he was saying actually with some constituents in the US, she's very popular. So it depends how you look at those popularity figures. She's also raised a lot of money in a matter of hours. And so the key issue perhaps is how Harris is going to redefine herself afresh to that US voter.
Well, she's able to at least cut the age question out of the conversation immediately. And she also resonates with women because she's taken the charge with attacking the Republicans over abortion. And so that's one area where she can certainly set herself apart. She's got her record, as a prosecutor. She can use that to differentiate herself from Donald Trump. But as you say, there's also some weaknesses there, including the fact that she's really led on some of the immigration policy over the the years in the Biden administration. That opens her to attack in turn from Donald Trump on an issue that's quite important to US voters. And she's untested in some other areas, really including on hardcore economic policy. As you say, she's been around for a while, but she's also a bit of an unknown to some US voters. And how does she now define herself as someone who won't just be, another version of Joe Biden for a further presidential term, but what's her own stamp on that? So it'll be interesting to see how she starts to do that in the coming weeks.
Yeah, absolutely. Even her biographer was saying that actually she can be quite private, quite guarded about her own personal views as opposed to her political views. Chad Thomas, let me bring you in. What would a Harris presidency mean for NATO and Ukraine? We know that Harris has been a prosecutor, but actually what is her view on foreign policy, on security issues? What do we know?
Yeah, I think if you look at it from the view of a world leader and you look at Joe Biden, you knew what you got with him, right? He was 5 decades, first in Congress, then vice president and president, and a true transatlanticist. I think with Kamala Harris, it's a little bit more of an open question, as Roz was talking about. What are her specific views on topics? I think it's clear, though, that you would see continuity in terms of what her administration, if she were to win, would do vis-a-vis Ukraine and NATO and European security. Very different than, of course, what President Trump and his vice presidential running mate would do regarding Ukraine. J.D. Vance has been very clear in saying that he doesn't see further aid for Ukraine being in the U.S. interest. So that would clearly be a big break from current U.S. foreign policy. But we'll have to wait and see, really, to see how Harris develops her policies in the coming weeks, really. That's all she has until the election, if she is, in fact, the nominee.
Chad, how do you think that Harris will deal with Trump? In some of the debates that I've seen her in has got some quite pointed attack lines. As a former prosecutor, you might expect that. But then Trump is a formidable debater and tweeter. How do you think she'll deal with Donald Trump?
Yeah, well, as Roz was saying, the attacks have already started, right? Kamala Harris has come out with an ad attacking Donald Trump at the top of the program here. You were playing a clip from Donald Trump attacking her. It's likely to get very personal between the two of them. That's sort of the MO at the moment in U.S. politics. And Kamala Harris will certainly attack Trump and the Republicans when it comes to social issues. She says that their views on things like abortion are very extreme. It plays well, of course, with the Democratic base. So I think you can expect that there will be certainly attacks from both sides as this plays out.
OK, so it's going to get personal. I mean, that seems fairly clear. Roz, who will be Harris's running mate? I mean, if she becomes the nominee, who would then do you think she might pick? Because that could be another big moment when that is unveiled, the other person, the vice president pick.
Well, there you could actually see a bit of a competition and a bit of jostling. And the question is, when you look at Kamala Harris and her strengths, who do you pair her with? Who can be a match for that? Who can pick up some of the areas where she's weaker? For example, or, in a geographical split in the US, do you get someone who comes from a Midwest background, for example, who can help her in those states? There'll be a lot of conversation around that combination. So you're looking at perhaps, the Minnesota Governor, Timothy Walz, Transport Secretary Pete Buttigieg has also come up. Gretchen Whitmer, of course, who's very popular in Michigan, she's sort of ruled herself out already, but there are some other governors, including Gavin Newsom of California, who could be in the mix. One person who could be quite interesting, actually, is Mark Kelly from Arizona. Of course, he's a hard person to throw arrows at. He's a veteran. He's a former astronaut, and of course, he became a public figure because his wife, Gabrielle Giffords, was shot, and so he's perhaps someone who could be an intriguing combination for her. But basically, you need to find someone who's a balance, possibly from the Midwest in particular, to help her with those states.
Yeah. Chad, how do you think investors will think about this?
Well, investors, obviously, they're looking for certainty, and this now throws uncertainty into the whole debate. They were already starting to trade, in particular around certain securities, with the idea that Trump was going to win, and then he would bring in tariffs, and he would do things that would benefit certain industries. Now, with Biden out and potentially Harris as the candidate, or obviously someone else, if not her, this brings uncertainty to the market, and they're going to have to recalibrate to see what they think once the nominee is in place, what the market thinks in terms of who's going to win.
Ros, how difficult is it to have now, bluntly, a lame duck president in the White House at a time of such uncertainty and insecurity in many parts of the world?
Well, it's interesting, of course, because Benjamin Netanyahu is in the US and is due to meet Joe Biden tomorrow and then address Congress on Wednesday. And, of course, Bibi, as is known, would be going there to get some specific things from Joe Biden. The messaging from the White House is that Joe Biden is very much still in the White House through this election. He doesn't intend to step down, and he'll be hoping to enact foreign policy throughout, including on the war in the Middle East, including on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, including with China. But with a big but, as Chad was saying, leaders are really looking ahead to say, well, it's probably either going to be Kamala Harris or Donald Trump in the White House come January. And really, can Biden do anything in between?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ros, for being with us this morning. That is Bloomberg's EMEA News Director, Rosalind Matheson, and to Chad Thomas, our Europe Executive Editor. Thank you so much for your time and your explanations and insights. Dan Moraine, journalist and author of the biography Kamala's Way, An American Life, spoke to me today about Harris's prospects of securing the nomination and running for the US presidency. He told me that despite Donald Trump saying that Harris would be easier to beat than Biden, people who underestimate Kamala Harris, quote, end up losing.
For a person who will be on the most public of stages, running for the president of the United States, she doesn't tell you very much about herself, her personal views, we know what her political views are. That's not a secret, but she can be a very closed book. She's a fascinating character, a true Californian, somebody who only could have come from California, I think. Her mother was an immigrant from India, her father an immigrant from Jamaica. They met at that most California of institutions, the University of California at Berkeley, in the 1960s. She is truly a product of California. Can't imagine any other state that could have produced quite like Kamala Harris.
That's very interesting. Do you think her background then, as you say, we know much more about her public life then, her background as a prosecutor, then as the AG, the Attorney General for California, do you think that's going to help or hurt her presidential campaign? How will it shape this campaign?
Well, I think it can only help her campaign. She was a prosecutor. She put people in prison. She's running against a candidate who's been convicted of 34 felonies. Prosecutor versus a felon seems to me to be a pretty stark contrast. She will be portrayed as being a California liberal. She certainly is liberal, and she's certainly a Californian. But she spent a lot of her career putting people who had committed serious crimes in prison. And the focus of much of her work as a prosecutor was to go after sex trafficking, crimes against children. I think it's kind of hard to attack that. Now, she opposed the death penalty. The death penalty, her stand on the death penalty certainly cost her some support when she was district attorney in San Francisco, the main prosecutor in the county of San Francisco. I'm not sure that issue is necessarily going to resonate quite so much in 2024. We'll see.
Do you think she's going to be able to unite the Democratic Party behind her? It's still not a certainty that she will become the Democratic Party nominee.
Right. Well, she's got so much momentum built up this first day. It's been quite impressive. The last report I saw was that she had raised $60 million today, which is just a phenomenal sum, if that's true. So, of course, somebody could mount a challenge to her. It's possible, but I think she has a huge amount of momentum right now. It would be very tough to knock her off as the Democratic nominee.
In terms of her best qualities or what her team might put forward, what sort of president do you think she might make?
It's a question for every vice president. Can a vice president be a Harry Truman, who was Franklin Delano Roosevelt's vice president? Nobody thought very much of him when he was vice president. He didn't have much of a role at all in the Roosevelt administration, and yet he became a very consequential president. So will Kamala Harris be a Harry Truman? We will see. But people who underestimate Kamala Harris tend to lose, and so I wouldn't underestimate her. In terms of her position, she's going to be a Biden Democrat. She's going to be supportive of Israel. She's certainly going to be supportive of the war in Ukraine. She's going to be very supportive of NATO. So she would continue the Biden tradition in those ways. I have no doubt.
What do you think drives Kamala Harris? How do you think she's going to deal with Donald Trump? He's said that Harris would be easier to defeat than Biden.
Again, I think people who underestimate Kamala Harris end up losing. And she would not be the first man to underestimate Kamala Harris. She can be formidable. She can be a very good candidate. I moderated a debate that she had when she ran for Attorney General against a very accomplished prosecutor and the head of the district attorney of Los Angeles County. So by all accounts, he should have won that race. He was very accomplished, but she bested him in that debate. I covered the one debate she had when she ran for the United States Senate in 2016. And, she's very good on her feet. So if Donald Trump thinks that she would be a pushover in the debate, I'm not so sure that he would be correct.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.